Wonderful. Well, welcome everyone to one of our last of our spring webinar series for N. This one is really dedicated to talking about essential steps of preparing students with intellectual disabilities for college, and specifically addressing that from an early age, as early as pre-K, because we believe that that kind of development, that kind of conversation is really valuable early on. So our game plan is to kind of take all these college readiness skills and list them out in a progression for you all, so that no matter what age your kiddo or your students are, you feel like you can really implement some skill development right off the bat. So that's where we're headed. Again, just want to encourage you, if you guys are looking for something specific, any in particular information about inclusive higher education, let us know who you are, and we would love to address that. We have Elise Kramer. She is a new staff member to N. She's going to be joining us and kind of facilitating our chat a bit tonight. So she's going to be happy to navigate your questions and make sure that I hit them as we go forward. So we will always have time for Q&A throughout our presentations. I tend to give you a lot of information, and so I want to make sure to pause, that we're understanding that I'm able to address any questions as we go forward. But don't feel like you have to wait for those Q&A times. If a question pops in your brain, throw it in the chat. We would love to just see that. I can either address it as I go, or we can come to it during a Q&A time. So go ahead and utilize that chat as you need. And then just for the sake of our recording purposes, go ahead and keep yourself muted during the bulk of our presentation. But when we chat and when I open it up for Q&A, would love for you to unmute, turn on your video so we can talk as close to face-to-face as possible. And then you guys should already have been notified that we are recording. And so this is going to be shared with anybody that registered. It's also going to be shared on our YouTube channel. So make sure to record all of our webinars so we can continue resourcing families, even if they weren't able to join in tonight. So this will be up on our YouTube channel as well as our webpage. So just as a heads up for you. So quick picture, what are our objectives for tonight? We have an hour, and then I have some time allotted for you guys to ask us questions afterwards. But I'm always going to start with a review of college options for students with intellectual disabilities. So we'll go over that fairly briefly tonight. We have a few more in-depth webinars that really go into what do those programs offer, what does the day in the life tend to look like for those students. So if you need more of an overview, feel free to let us know and we can link you to that. And then we're really going to spend the bulk of our time identifying essential skills or valuable skills, both academically and social emotionally, for individuals with intellectual disabilities to be prepared for college. And as I mentioned, we're going to break that down over the course of pre-K, elementary, middle school, and high school education. And then towards the end, we're going to address just some strategies for how to fade supports for this population of students so that we're empowering them continuously to take on more responsibility, to be autonomous in their life, because that is so pivotal and foundational for our students that are pursuing higher education or anything in their future. That's something that's just really valuable. So our contact information is up here on the screen. You'll also have access to this when we send you a follow-up email tomorrow. I always just want to present myself and Elise. We are open for emails at any time. Send us an email, give us a call. We're happy to chat. We know that this can be a lot to take in. And so we encourage you to ask questions and don't feel like you have to tackle it all on your own. So quick picture of who we are. In as a nonprofit, we work to educate and equip educators and parents across the state of Colorado with information about college options for students with intellectual and developmental disabilities. So we really work to develop programs that offer academic, social, vocational, and independent skill development for students with intellectual disabilities, where they're fully included in college campuses, pursuing their goals, taking on high expectations and challenges, etc. And I'll dive into what those programs offer. But at the nonprofit level, we support all of those schools that offer these programs. And the ways that we do so is by doing education to our educators in the communities, outreach to our families via webinars, via presentations, or one-on-one conversations. We also do expansion work, so getting other universities on board to support this population of students. And then also we track our outcomes. So we're kind of the organization that's pulling all of our data from these schools to see what our students with intellectual disabilities are doing after pursuing inclusive higher education. So real quick, what is inclusive higher ed? What does that mean? That's a language that I'm used to, but not everybody is. And so inclusive higher education is a unique type of service or program available to students with intellectual disabilities that historically do not have access to college and haven't been talked to about college as a next step for them. So you'll see in this history of disability services, this timeline here, kind of a progression of laws that were put in place to serve students with disabilities. The first couple from 1973 and 1990, those are our common laws referred to as ADA. So these are laws put in place for all higher education institutions that students that meet their entry criteria would have access to accommodations and that they would not be discriminated against. That is a wonderful law. We're so grateful for the work that has done. It only serves the students that meet that college entry criteria. And so we still had students with intellectual and developmental disabilities graduating from high school, completing their transition services, and going home to be on the couch, or not really feeling like they were challenged to learn more and to develop skills for more unique job opportunities. And so it was in 2008 that at the national level, there was a law put into place to support programs that allow an alternative admission process for students with intellectual disabilities so that they can access college. So that was happening at the national level. And then it was a little bit later, a few years after that, that Colorado finally jumped on board in 2016 when we said, we really want our students with intellectual and developmental disabilities who are graduating from severe support needs classrooms or completely segregated education experiences. We want them to have the option to be included in college because we believe that it's such a value and that they really are going to be able to excel with that experience. So we launched our first 3 inclusive higher education programs in the state of Colorado. And we have bumped up to 4 now, and that's continuing to grow. And I'll share those with you in just a bit. And then recently in 2022, we passed more legislation to offer more funding for more schools so that more and more students with intellectual disabilities can go to college and pursue their dreams, their goals, and really rise to the occasion. And it's been really exciting to track those outcomes, and I'll share about those as well. So in a nutshell, what are these inclusive programs? These ones that were finally put into place in 2016 here in Colorado. So they're only offered at select institutions. Those first couple laws require all institutions to have supports, but inclusive higher education programs are not required at all institutions. They're really for those that say, we want to serve this population and have a particular program developed for them. They offer alternative acceptance or admission criteria. So students don't have to have even a traditional diploma. We serve lots of students that have utilized extended evidence outcomes using their IEP in high school, and they're still able to apply to these programs and be admitted. They don't have to take those SATs or, those big exams. That's not something that's required. And also their GPA is not something that's being assessed. Instead, what we're looking at is what is their passion? What are their goals to continue their education? And what are the supports that they need? Would they require additional supports that these programs offer? Students are in these particular programs, they're going to be pursuing a certificate credential rather than your traditional degree. And that's because they're going to have access to modifications. So they're going to be admitted to these programs and then included in your traditional college courses based on what they want to study, based on their interests, and they get to choose from the entire course catalog. But once they're in those courses, fully engaged with neurotypical college peers with support as needed, they're able to use the program staff to modify the assignments in that class to meet their cognitive level. So a lot of times we're seeing students, instead of writing a 5-page paper, maybe we're working really, really hard on a robust paragraph. Or maybe we're doing presentation slides to show what you've learned. There's a wide variety of how we can modify at the college level. But because of those modifications, the students receive that certificate rather than a diploma because they're accessing different outcomes. These programs are for students with intellectual and developmental disabilities, though there's some gray area in there. Essentially, we want to be serving students that don't traditionally have access to college and would require those modifications to be able to be successful. If they don't require modifications and they could go to an open enrollment school, we want them to go that route and we want them to pursue that degree. So that's kind of those delineations that we tend to have. They're going to receive additional staff and peer mentor support in all of the domains of academics, social, career development, and independent living. And then they're really focused on their outcome. What is their job goal, and what classes are they taking to help them build up skills to be prepared for that? So there's going to be support in 4 key domains that I keep mentioning. And I'll kind of go over real quick how these programs offer support in each of these pieces. So the first one is academics. This is like one of the biggest things, is that we offer modifications to students with intellectual disabilities at the college level. Traditionally, our students are taking 2 inclusive courses amongst their neurotypical peers based on what they decide to study. And then they're also going to receive 1 specialized course within these programs. That's a little bit more direct instruction, focused on self-determination skills, focused on independent living skills, financial management, things like that. So they'll have a far more reduced course load so that they can put all of their energy into reaching the high expectations that they are held to at the college level. As I mentioned, they're going to have accommodations and modifications being able to be provided by the program staff. They're going to walk out with a certificate, and that certificate is approved at the Colorado Department of Higher Education level. So it is not just a piece of paper. They have a transcript, they have grades, it is accredited and weighted and meaningful for them. And they really, what we love is that they get to choose their area of study. They get to choose what classes they want to take. And so there's a lot of buy-in that we see from students once they get included into these courses. And even with modifications, there's high standards. A lot of our students with intellectual disabilities, unfortunately, just based on the way that our school systems work, are not held to high standards consistently. And you'll hear that that's really our mantra, that high standards matter, and challenging these students really matter because they are capable of great things. And so we really have seen our students grow and rise to that occasion when standards are set high for them at the college level. Yes, there are supports in place. Yes, there's needed guidance, but they're able to reach those expectations. At the social level, students are a college student, fully engaged across campus. They can attend clubs, they can run their own clubs, and they often do. We have students from these programs that are taking on leadership opportunities across campus and making the voices of students with disabilities loudly heard across their campus, and we love that. So the way that they're kind of supported is heavily based on peer mentors. So these programs will hire peer mentors to support these students in social endeavors, maybe go with them to figure out how to engage with new friends, different things like that. And program staff will help students kind of develop the skills that they need to feel independent socially. And then career. I mean, this is really the crux of all of our students that go to college, is how are they being prepared for meaningful vocation? And so students in these programs are going to have a progression of job experience. So they're going to do some pursuing of interest and researching, do some career readiness assessments, and then they're going to go into either on-campus or off-campus internships and the transition to paid employment. So there's really a progression over those 3 to 4 years that they're in a program where they're developing those skills and gaining those experiences, ideally to be employed in an area of interest by the time that they graduate. And then on the independent level, even if they're not living on campus, students are able to have person-centered planning where they're focused on skills that they want to develop over their time in college so that they can live as independently as possible, whether that's transportation access or medication management, whatever it might be. They can work with their program staff to develop those things. We do have access to on-campus living support. So students at our universities get to live on campus, whether in apartments or dorms, and have peer mentors support them consistently, have residential staff trained to support them. And again, that's another area where we're really seeing students rise to high expectations and campuses develop an inclusive culture where there's natural supports to guide these students as they learn how to live on campus. So our 4 programs that offer that level of support across the state of Colorado are these 4. So we have Arapahoe Community College in Littleton, Colorado. That's our non-residential option. So it's purely a commuter campus. It's a 3-year program, but a really wonderful community to start in, as community colleges are dedicated to serving diverse student populations. UCCS, which is in Colorado Springs, or the Office of Inclusive Services. Theirs is a 4-year program, and they have on-campus apartments and a really robust support system for them in those apartments. It's been really wonderful to see students thrive there. UNC GOAL, which stands for Go On and Learn. They're in Greeley, Colorado. They're a 4-year program as well, and they have on-campus dorms, so your more traditional on-campus living experience. And then Global Inclusive Program, which is at Regis University in Denver. Theirs is a bit unique that they're only offering a 1 to 2 year certificate track at this point. That might increase over the next couple of years, but they also have on-campus dorm options for students. So all 4 of these programs specifically serve students with intellectual disabilities. And they all have what we call CTP status, which you'll see down at the bottom. Essentially, that means that all of these programs have met a long list of criteria to show that they're inclusive, that they're helping students track their outcomes and development, and therefore students in these programs have the ability to complete a FAFSA, or financial aid application. The unique component that I always point out is that students in these programs, because they're receiving a modified certificate, they unfortunately don't have access to federal loans. But when you complete that FAFSA, they still have access to federal grants and federal work study to help chip away at the cost of college. So that's a huge win. And then all of these programs have the same comprehensive higher education certificate model so that students can transfer across these programs. So you might have a student start at the community college level and transfer up to UNC. We've seen that happen. They continue on their same path of study. And it's a really great way to have that certificate have weight and meaning across our state. So real quick, what are our students studying? Which I love to point out that this tends to be a unique list of areas of study because they finally have this like whole curriculum available to them and they're challenged to dream and to pursue those things. So we've got students in graphic design, communication, early childhood, performing arts. Healthcare has been a really big one that we've actually seen students really thrive in. Human services, journalism, sports management, exercise science, and so many more. We've had some students in wanting to really study the judicial system, be a self-advocate. And so this list can continue on, but we love seeing the diversity of what students are able to pursue. And then a quick picture of what are the outcomes from our students that have gone through these programs. We've now had 44 graduates in the state of Colorado officially this May. And we have a few students that are para-educators that have gone back to their hometowns and are now serving students with disabilities there. Administrative assistants in organizations that they love, graphic designers, lots of students pursuing teacher assistant roles in the education system, lots of students working in healthcare, serving in a variety of settings. So we have, a couple that are working in hospital nutrition department, providing supplements, all those things. We have some working in athletics. So really all across the board in terms of what students have access to. And we've also begun to see these students live more independently. We have a handful of our graduates that are living completely independently and have been doing so for a year, which COVID really took a knock on a lot of things, but we're starting to see these outcomes really pile up. So several that are living independently, several that are participating in nonprofits in their community, on boards, and also a lot of our graduates are part of our alumni association that IN runs. So we just get to see all the things that they continue to accomplish. And we really love keeping track of them and all that they're doing. So before I get into skill development and how we can prepare our students with intellectual disabilities for these programs, I'm curious what questions are out there about inclusive higher education in general.
Shayna, there's a question in the chat. It says, would you say in your experience that students with Down syndrome typically go through transitions programs first before going to college?
Good question. It's kind of a 50-50, I would say. There's beauty to those transition programs that A, that's free services to your student. B, there's lots of growth in terms of their autonomy, because at the high school level, there's so much structure. And in transition, you start to see them engage with downtime a little bit more, navigate community services. So there's definitely some benefit to that. It's not for everybody. Some of the reasons why we have students forego transition before they come to us is primarily because they primarily stop focusing on academic development at the transition level. That's not really their key focus. Their focus tends to be on employment development skills and community engagement, which are beautiful things. But it's really hard for our students to stay academically up to par and then come to college and be challenged in a whole new way. So that is something that our families tend to navigate and kind of have to choose what's best for themselves. But really, it is unique to each student. And again, I would say it's about 50-50 of who goes to transition and who comes to us. And then also, we don't have an age cap. So students can go to transition, take 5 years off, and then come on back. That's great. But we can also have students come straight out of their senior year of high school. So it's really, really up to each family. Good question. Go ahead, Rim.
Yeah, I have a question. Could you elaborate a little bit more on the certificate credentials? I think I'd just like to hear that again, a little elaboration, and maybe a couple of examples of that.
Absolutely. Yep. So the certificate credential that we are referring to is called a comprehensive higher education certificate. That's kind of the blanket title of that certificate for each institution. So students are going to come to that program. They're going to be pursuing that comprehensive higher ed certificate with a specific area of study. So they get to identify an area of study that's offered to all students at the institution. And it's just broken down by limited course credits. So they're only taking 2 courses, inclusive courses each semester, and then that one specialized course. Each school does it a bit differently. Elevate at ACC is a really great example that in each semester, they prescribe kind of a general education course. So intro to communication, your basic English writing course, things like that. So there's one that's kind of that general studies, and then one class that they choose as an elective or an area of study. So they can take, what we love about this certificate is they can really piecemeal different courses together to meet their particular vocational goal. So we've had a student that really wanted to be owning his own photo company. And being able to kind of pursue that. So he took not only photography, but he also took business courses. He also took a marketing your image course so that he learned how to market. So he was kind of able to take from multiple categories, one class at a time, to build up those skills. So does that make sense for him?
Yeah, I get that. Yeah, that's really good. What about the early childhood ed component?
Yeah. So if a student is pursuing like a industry recognized certificate, so if they need a certificate to be able to be a teacher assistant in a particular district, they can go through that route, but they're not going to pursue the comprehensive higher education certificate, which allows for modifications. They're going to pursue that traditional certificate route, but they wouldn't be able to access modifications. So if they're going for an industry specific certificate, a lot of times we see students retake courses, which sometimes just it takes a few for them to be able to gain all that content and meet those expectations. But if they are pursuing the comprehensive higher education certificate with a focus or study area of early childhood education, they can choose a select like 5 of the courses from that early childhood education certificate that they meet into theirs and are able to receive modifications.
All right, very good. Thank you.
Yeah, good questions. Any other ones before we keep on moving? Wonderful. All righty. So let's talk about the skills that are really valuable to our students with intellectual disabilities. And the reason why I focus a lot of our conversations and a lot of our webinars on this skill development piece is because we talk so much about skill development and college readiness for our neurotypical students. From the time that they start preschool or elementary school, we're asking them what they want to be when they grow up. We're empowering them to prepare for college. And then our students with IDD tend to not get that same level of support and intentionality early on. And so we believe that they should, and it's actually even more important that they get those conversations now, that their families get those conversations early so that they can progressively build the skills that are necessary. So I speak to just kind of the purpose of preparing our students with intellectual disabilities for college, first as a normative pathway. We do this for every student that moves through our education system, and it should be no different for our students with disabilities. We also want it to be something where students are informed about their options and not that educators or parents take them out of the running based on assumptions. really with these inclusive higher education programs, students that traditionally, if I'm at a resource fair and a student walks by with their parents, they tend to say, oh no, college can't be for me. But then once I rule them back in, I can say, actually, these services allow college to be for you and allow you to access that campus and allow you to find your place in that community. So there's really far more students that have access now than ever. And we want students to say, I know that that's an option and I'm choosing not to pursue it, rather than us not telling them about it. So informed choice and allowing them to make that decision either direction is really important. And then I also talk a lot about what I call the even if mentality, which is even if these students that you're working with in a severe supports needs classroom do not want to go to higher education or college, these skills are still so vitally important to their future development. And we see that with all students, not just our students with disabilities. And so I speak a lot about anything that we're developing in them for college readiness is actually going to transfer to anything they do in their future. So it's transferability of skills, which makes it worthwhile. And then what I just mentioned, the importance of having these conversations early, allow our students with delays or with disabilities to progressively develop these skills over time. All the more reason that those conversations and those strategies need to be implemented early. And then we also have seen just historically and based on research all across the nation, that there's such a link with high expectations of students and what their outcomes actually are. There's a level of students having the competency and the skills to reach their goals and the equal value of them having the belief that they're capable. And so when we set those expectations clearly and high, then we see our students really motivate intrinsically to reach them. So high expectations are going to lead to better transition outcomes. So I just love this quote, and I think I might have even plucked it in here another place, but this is from one of our graduate parents. She says that the bar has been set high and students have risen and reached it. They've been presumed competent and their lives changed. And that's really what happens when we set the bar high for our students, even with intellectual and developmental disabilities. So let's talk early childhood. I don't know, Tara and Tammy, what age group you guys are working with, if you have kiddos in this age group, but it's not going to be as much detail in these younger ages, but we really think it's important to start these conversations early on. So these things, if you're past this time frame, it doesn't mean they're gone, right? They can still be implemented at any time. I would say this is really just our ideal timeline of when families, if I were to catch a family right at birth, I would really want them to start this timeline as soon as pre-K. And that's kind of our vision. So
yeah, we're at 21, so we're a little late on that.
Perfect.
So
that's okay.
no
These are perfect. These are all skills that, and I think Rim attended a webinar where I put all the skills kind of together. And so, yeah, these are going to be pertinent to your student even at 21. But we really want students, educators and parents to set expectations high early on, ask those same questions. What do you want to be when you grow up? Why? What do you want to do? All those big things. We really want families to be in the know about local and national options so that they have it in their brain early on, so that when we get to 21, it doesn't feel like a race and chaos, which sometimes it can feel like. We want to make sure that students and families are hearing about success stories, particularly with like a parallel to similar disabilities. So if you have a student with Down syndrome, I want you to hear about other students with Down syndrome that are able to attain this outcome and attain employment and live independently. Or if you have someone with cerebral palsy, et cetera, we really want those to be paralleled so families can see their students in that potential. A big thing is to encourage saving early on. We tend to do this for our neurotypical students, and it just hasn't been an option. And so why would we for our students with more severe disabilities? But we really encourage families to look into that as early as possible. The best recommendation we can give you is to look at ABLE accounts. So that is a specific disability-based savings account that does not affect their SSI or does not affect their limit of income or income limit. And you can save for a variety of things in ABLE accounts and use those funds for a variety of things, one of which would be inclusive higher education. If students maybe don't fall in our inclusive higher education path, They can pursue 529 plans and use those for your traditional college pathway. But if students are pursuing inclusive higher education, we really encourage a transfer of 529 plans into ABLE accounts. There's no cost for that transfer. It just is far better for students with disabilities based on all of the waivers and the SSI and all of those pieces. And we have a really great consultant that's happy to meet with families. If that's something that you guys are questioning right now, I can connect you with a College Invest consultant. Another one that we hit on is age-appropriate academic skills early on. So even if a student is delayed, really setting the bar that we want to get them to this expectation, and we're going to progress to those skills early on. Empowering self-awareness for our young kiddos, including your physical space and their awareness, and just talking them through that, as well as their emotional awareness and regulation. So much of their learning happens at that young age, and talking through that and having educators on the same page as families about how we want to engage that regulation is really key. And even at an early age, creating an environment of choice, meaning that we're not just telling students what to do, but we're giving them options where they're starting to learn what I have to say matters. Me thinking critically matters. I do have choices in my future, and that develops some pretty deep-seated self-advocacy and ownership. And really supporting student decision-making with prompting. So a lot of times we tell students what to do, but instead really prompting them, what would you do in this situation? And really learning how they're processing. Even if they're nonverbal, there's some ways for us to engage in prompting them to make a first decision, and then we can guide from there. A big thing that is uncomfortable for many families, but so important, is allowing space for students to fail. Even at this young age, and helping them navigate, what does that mean? How can we improve for the next time? Even if it's as small as dropping something that they didn't expect to in pre-K, that can send their world shattering, but prompting them through what we can do differently next time. And failure is absolutely okay, and often a really good learning experience. So beyond pre-K, getting more into your traditional education classroom, this is where I really want to promote least restrictive environment as early as possible, that we're getting students engaged with the general school population so that they're not only used to a segregated education system, but they believe and they see that they have value and supports available in the general education setting. Fostering healthy social emotional communication, meaning really coaching them through problem solving skills, talking through problem solving. A lot of times we just assume, people inherently navigate that. Not our students with disabilities. There needs to be some guidance there. Prompting them to ask for help when needed, rather than just assuming it's going to come to them, and identifying some cultural or social expectations in their school setting and just vocalizing those and coaching them through. The big thing is to talk to all students about college. That's what you'll hear me harp on that forever, that we want to ask all students about what they want to do in their future, and if college is something they're interested in, and start that conversation early in elementary school, and they'll start to consider if that's a possibility or what they want to do. And then this is also a great time to support healthy habits, which help them with independent living once they get to that college level. So talking through physical activities that are good for them, healthy eating, portion control, things like that. A lot of times we see students build really hard habits or unhealthy habits through high school. They come to college, there's lots of independence for them, and that can just take a huge toll. So as we're building up strength and awareness of healthy habits early on, it just sets them up for better success at the college level. And then really important that we're fostering academic skills specifically for their age group. Again, obviously students are going to fall at different levels, but a lot of what I see or what I hear from educators is, and it's more so once we get into the later years of K-12, but if students are not reaching an educational level or expectation, then their education becomes limited and they don't challenge them as much. But we really want that to be a reason why educators lean in and help them reach those goals and support them with use of assistive technology or other strategies. So some really good elemental academic skills for students to be focusing on is sentence or paragraph structure, just knowing how the flow of words go, and teaching our kiddos with disabilities that early on so that they're set up for success in their later years. offering some audiobook usage in elementary school so that they know if they're not able to read all the words on a page, there are some other avenues for them to access that information. That's just a natural form of an accommodation. Prompting them to explore their academic interests. A lot of times we might talk about hobbies, but like, what's your favorite subject? What do you love to learn about because you're capable of learning about it? And really having that be our baseline. Focusing on self-determination, self-advocacy, and personal agency skills. So we don't want that to wait until they're 15. In high school, those skills can be developed early on, even at the elementary level. So things that can be included for this would be like goal setting. So if you're coming in for a unit on reading, asking students what their goal is for themselves. And if it's haywire, that's okay, but we want them to set a goal to have a voice at the table, and providing that culture of choice. And then help students identify and talk about their disability characteristics, including their strengths and their weaknesses, even at the elementary level. A lot of times we kind of feel closed off to talking about that with our kiddos, but there's a huge cultural shift of empowerment of our students with disabilities, that they would know what their needs are, and that actually sets them up for better success than being limited with that knowledge. And so really empowering them to identify, what do you need in this situation? What would be helpful here? Or these are the things that we're providing to you. Just communicating that to them. There's a link to a video that doesn't work when I'm sharing my screen, so I won't be able to share it with you. But this is a great 2-minute 30 video talking about some self-determination skills from an organization called I'm Determined. They have really great modules for students to work through, parents to work through, educators to work through, to talk about how to build these skills in kiddos even early as elementary school. So yes, perfect. At least threw that in our chat for you guys to review, but I'll scan it instead. Okay, middle school. So this is kind of where we up the rigor a bit, where we want to keep that rigor continuing. So maintaining academic rigor for students with disabilities, not just pigeonholing them, which sometimes starts to happen as early as middle school of, hey, they're really not meeting the mark in math, and so we're going to just start chugging away and stop focusing on that skill development. We're all the more reason to say, hey, well, let's build that up. Let's have some supports enter in to support that student. So really focusing on rigor and advocating for that rigor in your IEP meetings. Discussing students' interests and goals and making that the focal point of an IEP. A lot of times we wait until they're 15 transition IEP for their voice to be really loud at the table. But even at the middle school level, their voice matters and their interest matters, and starting that where they can have clear input about what they want to do, or participation in student teacher conferences and things like that. Encourage student engagement in extracurriculars. So beyond that academic rigor, now we also want to empower those other sides of them, participating in things outside of the school environment. You'll see in that video that Elise sent a focus on being connected to their community, not just in the school, but also in their, your neighborhoods. And so participating in extracurricular things is going to be great for them, particularly starting to build in some comfort with sleeping away and having support in place away from home. Building comfortability with e-communication, which is always daunting when I talk to families about this, but talking through explicitly, strategies for texting appropriately, email etiquette, things like that. So that they have that on their radar, they have those expectations early on. And then empowering students at the middle school level to manage even portions of their own schedule. So much of middle school is dictated for you. So much of K-12 is dictated for you, which is fair, but really prompting students to take some ownership of even a sliver of their schedule. So having reminders on their phone before lunch, or having reminders on their phone or an iPad about which class they need to go to, or if they need to bring assignments with them, etc. We tend to have lots of students utilize their phone pretty heavily for that schedule management, and that's great. That's a great resource to use. We also want to encourage students to have some volunteering experiences in middle school. This just really helps them to develop what they like and what they don't. We can come with a lot of ideas, but if you don't get hands-on experience, you don't know what it's really like. So if students love cooking and they find themselves in a kitchen and it's stressful and they don't want to do it, great. Then before we get to high school and to that transition IEP, our plans are going to change, which is wonderful. And so promoting those options, getting them connected in the community. Again, including students in that IEP process, having them be a leader, not just a passive participant, but a leader in those meetings and parent-teacher conferences, etc. Helping students become more comfortable with downtime. This is something that's pretty large at the college level. They no longer have back-to-back classes. They have lots of time in between classes, in between club events, in between meetings, and really helping them navigate what's a good use of my downtime right now. Sometimes that means we just need to veg, and that's okay. But sometimes that means we need to catch up on some reading, or sometimes that means we need to follow up on tasks that we forgot about yesterday, things like that. So talking through almost like a, kind of like a back pocket list of what are the top 5 things you can do when you have an hour or so of downtime at school, and what would that look like? And then strategizing systems for management of personal information. So this, you start to really have students develop, what's their address, what's their phone number, being able to memorize those pieces of information and take some personal ownership of that, but also things like medication, which can be, that feels again pretty daunting, but a progressive pass off of them taking ownership of their medications is great. We've seen students and families start by empowering them to take vitamin supplements first to see how consistent they are, something that's not detrimental to their health, but just a benefit if they take it. And that's a good assessment strategy for them. And then they can move towards actually taking those medications, making sure they're managing where they're at, etc. And then academic skills at the middle school level, really emphasizing a use of tracking assignments. So whether that's on your phone, a planner, but taking ownership of assignments. And I think this requires us to be pretty bold in our advocacy with our educators that students with disabilities can handle assignments. A lot of times they don't have assignments coming home with them, but they're capable of continuous learning. And so even considering how we can prompt that with our educators. We encourage our students to have kind of like this checklist of preparation. Really simple, doesn't have to be crazy, but do you have all of your readings with you? Do you have your notebooks in your backpack? Do you have pens? And just providing a checklist for them to check their own backpack before they go to class, before they go to school. That gives some autonomy and some critical thinking for them of what are all the things that I typically use in a day. Identifying core information and texts. So I know a lot of our students are not going to be reading heavy textbooks. And even at the college level, while they're still going to be required to read texts, they're not going to be required to read the breadth of text that probably you and I are thinking of, but they are going to be challenged to pull out key information from a textbook. What are the headings? What are key vocabulary? And we focus with students a lot on chunking. So it's not the most pretty term, but essentially eliminating things that are irrelevant and focusing in on one thing at a time. So actually, these slides are an example of chunking where I don't give you all of it at once. I'm giving you one thing at a time so that you're not overly distracted. And there are some strategies for our students to do that in a reading setting as well. And then note taking. We tend to see students get to college and not even consider that they're supposed to be taking notes, either because things have just been provided to them or that expectation of paying attention wasn't set, whatever it might be. So we really want to encourage students to think about note taking, not just in the traditional sense of I'm a college student, I have to write notes, but paying attention to key information and just kind of keeping their brain alert in whatever format they need. So maybe that's use of assistive technology to record lessons. Maybe that's note cards on their table that they just write words that stand out to them. It could be a wide variety of things, but it's just kind of improving their awareness that they have a role, an active role to play in the academic setting. And then sustainability of study habits. This is also a big shift when we see students get to college. We say, hey, you're going to actually have to review those notes you took because you're actually going to have assignments on those and you're going to have to talk with your faculty members about those. So practicing ways to review information. So even in a classroom, setting up 15 minutes at the end of the day, scheduling out that time to say, I want everybody to go back to their note-taking system and review what we talked about. That's really great for memory and recall, but it also just builds in a natural study habit for students so it doesn't feel so foreign when they get to the college level. And this is also a great time for educators or parents to make sure that students are reviewing their work before they submit it. A lot of times we have students scribble it in, send it in, they're kind of expecting that basic participation grade. But at the college level, they're going to be challenged, even with modifications. If they have things that don't make sense, they're going to be addressed. And so we encourage students to take a beat, review their work, make sure that it matches the assignment, ask for help and clarification before submitting. And if they can build in that practice early, it's again not going to be a big shock to their system once they get to the college level. And then on the social emotional side of things, this is kind of something I was just chatting about, that constructive criticism. They're going to receive that at the college level. That's how we learn as human beings, is to receive constructive criticism. And so we don't want to withhold that from our students with disabilities. And so participating in ways for them to receive that constructive criticism rather than it just going to parents about how students are doing, we want that information to go to students for them to know, for them to understand. Listening to and evaluating feedback from peers. So a big push that I have for middle school or high school special education teachers is to do group work. Feels daunting, feels crazy when you have students with such a wide range of abilities, but we've seen such a benefit at the college level of how we bring those minds together. And having some group work or peer feedback is so valuable because you're learning how to interact on a peer-to-peer level, really challenging one another and thinking critically. So yes, participation in group projects and activities and really engaging that early on. Using outside resources, not just from your special education department, but empowering students to go to a tutoring center on campus and to go with them, maybe send a peer mentor with them to access that resource, but so that they're starting to think of what are all the things available to all students, because I'm one of them and I want to access that too. And just promoting that awareness and use of those resources is huge. And that really stems from at our inclusive higher ed programs. We, a lot of times I'll have families say, I want to go observe a program, and our program staff will come back to us saying, I don't know what to show you because our students are all over campus. It's not one classroom to come to. We've got students in tutoring, students in the writing center, students in class, students in clubs. And that's really the culture of inclusion that we want. So if we can promote that at the K-12 level, it sets them up for great success. Practicing impulse control, some strategies with students early on to not blurt out unnecessarily or to think through things critically before they speak them, or even behaviorally. A big concern that we'll see for students that don't get admitted to inclusive higher education programs is those severe behavior concerns. I've never seen a student where cognitively we would deny them, right? We think that we can modify anything to help students have access. But it's that behavioral concerns that really tends to be a limiting factor. So developing some control practices early on is great. And now the high school level, kind of where the meat tends to take place. But again, if we're spreading this out over time, we're setting our students and families up for better success. A big piece in our high school level is having students have an awareness of their disability and being able to anticipate the supports that they're going to need. A big recommendation I have is that students would actually know the modifications they're receiving in their IEP. A lot of times they come to college, they're wrapping up high school, and they have no clue what's being modified. And that's not going to set them up for success when they get into a job where they might need some things modified or adapted to meet their level, and they're going to have to advocate for that. Or when they get to college, when they're going to have to advocate for that. So helping them to identify what are the services you're receiving and how can you communicate that to those around you. So even setting up a time where students meet with a paraeducator and communicate their accommodations and modifications, even if the paraeducator knows them, empowering students to vocalize them and ask for them is really huge. And then this, again, is going to help them in that academic realm, vocational and personal goals when they can anticipate those needs. Informing students and families about inclusive higher education and really encouraging, calling those programs that I mentioned, calling those staff, looking at their websites, going and visiting campus to see that students are truly everywhere. Whatever it might be, if you guys ever need help contacting them, I'm your girl. Feel free to reach out to me. I'm happy to connect you. And then really starting to press into community services as well. So our programs do not operate in silos. Like I said, they're going to be using services across their campus, but they're also going to be accessing community services for students. So our students are enrolled in DVR, where they're a division of vocational rehabilitation. They're meeting with the counselor that's supporting their employment goals. They're connected with their local community-centered boards to receive guidance on waivers and things like that, so that when they graduate from college, they still have communal support to continue reaching their goals. Big piece is money, so encouraging some independent budgeting and management of that. So opening an account for students specifically, because at the college level, they're going to need that level of independence, and having their experience of some management at the high school level when you have clear oversight is really wonderful. Talking with them about spending and saving, safeguarding that information, all of those pieces. These are also addressed at our college programs. They talk about that again and again in their direct instruction courses. But it's, again, really great to start early on. Empowering students to make their own appointments. This is a big shift for students when they come away from their parents and they're on college campuses and maybe they're sick. And yes, there might be a nurse on campus, but maybe they need more than that. So have they had experience calling to make doctor's appointments or going to the dentist? And how can they navigate that now? So again, it's not a shock to that system. Using public transportation is really great. So a lot of our students, very few of our students are going to be driving. We do have a few that have gone through driver's ed and received support, which is wonderful, but most of them don't. And so accessing things like Access-a-Ride or public transportation with the support of your system now allows them to have more strategy and ownership of that when they're in a new place. Yeah, so that's a big one. And really a lot of our transition programs, I can't remember, Tara, if that was you who asked, or Tammy, but a lot of our transition programs develop that public transportation awareness early on, which is great. I wish it would happen earlier in our severe support needs classrooms, but it's a worthwhile no matter when they start it. All right. Academic skills at the high school level. Again, appropriate use of resources at the school, just knowing that they have access to them, that they're not reliant on one support staff, but that there's usage of multiple support staff. Increasing their curiosity, encouraging their curiosity and desire to learn. So even if they have this really lofty goal, and that's okay to have lofty goals, not to shoot that down, but to encourage their looking into that. Let's look at what a day in the life of that job is going to look like. What's the education you're going to need? Things like that, where you're really empowering them to be curious and to learn more. Really challenging them to fade support. A lot of our students have learned helplessness, where they're focused on receiving support from a paraeducator rather than attempting and failing something on their own. And so starting to fade that paraeducator support at high school level allows them to attempt things, to tackle tasks without assistance immediately and then ask for it as needed. Shows them a bit more of what their capability is, as well as those that are supporting them. Prompting them to ask teachers and peers questions to gain clarification. So not just, well, I don't know. How would we find that out? Who could we ask? Let's strategize what we would do in any situation to find out more information. And then again, moving into participation in class discussions and being active parts of their learning experience. And then persistence is big. So it is often that our students get frustrated by the high levels of expectations that we hold for them at the higher education level. And so we've really had to coach them through persistence, that even when things are hard, even when you're being challenged in ways you never have before, how can you keep moving forward and continue pursuing your goal? What's that main goal you're after? Then the social emotional skills, really an awareness for them of, respecting appropriate boundaries between their peers and between a mentor and between a faculty member, and identifying those different levels of relationships. Sometimes those can all get blurred in our brain. When you break that out and we help them see appropriate interactions across those different levels of relationship, they can delineate it a bit better. Managing conflict and disappointment appropriately. This is a key thing that we find when our students are living amongst peers in their dorms. Conflict happens. That is something that all college students are going to learn. And so a lot of times we talk about that early on with them, but we want to make sure we're doing that with this population too. What do we do when we're frustrated with our friends? How do we navigate that anger? Having flexibility, adaptability. A lot of times, a college class can be canceled like that. What do you do when you have free time and you are planning to go to class? How do you adapt to that? How do you have kind of that back pocket list of things that you can do? How do you problem solve? And then owning responsibility. So this really comes from being able to take on tasks independently, where they start to see, oh, this is my assignment. This is my task. This is my education, and really taking ownership of that in the academic world, as well as social and work-related environments, where they start to see, like, I have a role here, and so I'm going to try accordingly. Growth mindset is something that you'll hear at the college level all the time. And I think it's starting to really permeate our K-12 world as well. But specifically for students with intellectual and developmental disabilities, there's this long, outdated belief that there's kind of this cognitive cap. And truly there's not. There are students with significant delays and significant disabilities, and I don't disregard that, but they're still able to gain new skills, and still, even if it's a small progression over a matter of years, we believe that they're still capable of that. And that changes when we believe in that growth mindset, socially, academically, whatever. That changes how we interact with our students and hold them accountable. So we want to include goals that relate to their college preparation in the IEP, making sure that not only their vocational goal is going to be put in place, but they would actually have goals for college. There's a link here. And again, we're going to send these slides to you guys with some recommendations of IEP goals for you to start kind of adapting for your particular needs. And then I'm going to harp again on that independence of schedule. Students really start to take control of their calendar at the college level. And it's a really great resource to them for independence. And then I encourage a lot of students, even early on in high school, for just like general reading resources to use, to go to these common websites that develop college readiness skills. So I think college.net is a great one for resources. Going to college.org, that I'm Determined one that Elise put in the chat. And then ONET Online is a great resource for observing a day in the life of a particular job. It gives wonderful background on that. And so those are great places for students in high school to just be, to be gaining information and to be curious. So I realized that I have a lot more content for you than it's going to fit in an hour. So really quickly, I just want to talk about the importance of fading support. And then we'll open it up for questions and you guys can hop off as you need to. But that is really the movement from providers being the primary doer of activities for students or support of students, and progressively moving away to show what students are capable of and to get a better view of what their needs are. Because if we're kind of swarming them with all of this support, we don't actually know what they're capable of and what their gaps are appropriately. We're kind of assuming that on our own. And so we need to give space for those to be included. So this is our friendly reminder that too much support can be just as inhibiting as not enough support. And so we really have to hold that in balance, especially at the K-12 level. So we encourage like a modeling of behaviors and offering natural prompts for students, things like watch me cues so that they can observe, and then empower them to take that on their own. And then really prompting cues is, how do you go about this? Rather than them just asking you one point blank question and you feeding them the answer, say, well, hold on. Before I answer that question, what would you do first? And give wait time. I think a lot of times we fill that space assuming that they don't know, and they've learned that if they wait long enough, somebody's going to give them the answer. But if we don't fill that time and allow them to say, I don't know the answer to that question, then we can go from there. But we want them to identify that. Providing wait time. I'm ahead of my slides. It's perfect. And then really moving your physical space away from them so that they have even a physical autonomy and independence to try things independently. One last thing that I kind of want to hit on before I transition to Q&A. I'm going to cut through a few of these pretty quickly. I think this is the one. So really a prompt hierarchy is something that's so important, where we're starting with the least intrusive prompts for students and then increasing to more support as needed. Typically it's been the other way around, and students have learned that and they're used to all that support coming up top. But if we start with least intrusive, then we're really progressing to understand their needs. So a lot of how I recommend introducing information is you do it so that I do it as a teacher. I do it, then we can do it together. And then I want you to do it with guidance. And then I want you to do it independently. That's kind of a slow progression of skill development. But then when it comes to having them do it independently, the prompting needs to be the opposite direction where you're starting small. So offer open-ended questions for them to answer as needed to fill that space. If they don't have the answer, then prompt them to recall background information before giving it to them. And if they don't yet have the answer, prompt them like with a direct cue. Let's look to this textbook. Let's look to this resource. Let's do some research and still give them time to find that information. I think a big thing is we're force feeding these students a lot of times the information and not teaching them how to find it because they have the skills available to do so. So I'm going to blaze through these. These are just some examples of like personal ways to fade supports. There's some really great guides that Elise included in this presentation for you about how to do that, how to gauge how to fade supports at home and in the school system. And so that's really wonderful. This is my encouragement to, my favorite quote of all time. So with that in mind, and with it being 5:30, I just wanted to ask if you guys had any questions from those skills, any input from your experience about how your students with ID are developing. I know I threw a lot at you, so.
Did you say that we were going to receive these slides?
Yep.
Or
Yep. We'll send that to you.
The whole thing or just
the whole thing?
Oh, okay. All right.
Yeah, we'll give you the whole thing as well as a checklist document of all the skills we talked about and then the recording of our webinar.
Okay, awesome. Thank you. It's really been very informative.
Great. Wonderful.
Go ahead. I think someone else had a question.
Oh, that's okay, Tammy, go for it.
I stupidly missed the deadline for Ariel to go this fall. Is that something that I just need to do directly with the college, or is that something I do through your agency?
Good question. Yeah, it would be to the colleges directly because each of those programs have their own deadlines, which I know is kind of tricky to track.
Sure.
My recent update is that Regis is the only one that formally still has openings. But yeah, I would encourage you to go to those websites and give them a call if there's some additional needs that you want to talk to with each of them.
And then as far as funding goes, I know right now her waiver is state funding, then TRE, then Pikes Peak Respite, then her provider, and then it gets to Ariel. Are any of those funds available for this through like community connections?
Yeah, it's always worth an ask. So what we haven't received a clear, all of these community centered boards are going to offer this amount of money to their students in inclusive higher ed. But once enrolled or if in pursuing enrollment, I would ask your community centered board or your case manager first to say, hey, Ariel's going this route. What are some funds I can access from these community agencies? Some helpful language that I have heard from past parents is to ask for self-determination funds, which I know feels kind of like the secret backdoor to some funding. But that has been a clue given to us to ask. And so several CCBs have offered scholarships to students. DVR is also something that if Ariel's connected with DVR and has a job goal that's aligned with what she wants to study, they can pay towards tuition.
Okay. And we're having our first meeting next week with them.
Good.
In fact, there was one more question that just came up, but I will table that until I can think of it. Sorry.
No worries. No worries. Oh, good. Good questions.
Oh, yes, the self-determination fund verbiage. I've always felt like I didn't have the secret handshake down, so I appreciate that information.
I know. And I don't know why we have those systems. I don't know why there's barriers like that, but I'll share any nuances that I learned, I promise.
Yeah.
Your contact information is also available in these slides as well?
Yep. So it's at the front, and then you're going to receive these slides from my email directly. So I'll email you in the morning. And I have every week, I have a set time on Tuesday evenings or afternoons, 3 to 5 for just one-on-one meetings. If you guys have questions for us to do virtually, or we can always set up a time to call. Because I know it's a lot to process through. So I'm happy to chat.
I have a question as far as eligibility for programs.
Mhm.
Do students have to receive a high school diploma, or can it be a certificate of completion?
It can be a certificate of completion.
Okay.
Yeah, for these particular programs. Great question. Yeah, that's really a lot of the families that we talk about, they're kind of wondering if they need a transition to getting that diploma and the traditional route. Students in these programs, when they're applying, the biggest thing that they're looking at is their IEP and kind of their academic history and what their level of need is, and that they're done with the K-12 system. So there's no dual enrollment right now. They just have to be completed to some degree.
And then talk about DVR, and that's why I'm in your world, is because the School to Work Alliance program,
Mhm.
the SWAP program, because I think they play a role up to like age 24, isn't it?
I think it's 21. I think they go through your transition age.
Okay, all right, thank you.
Yeah. And we're facilitating conversations with DVR across the state, so that all DVR counselors, ideally, I know there's lots of turnover, but they're being educated and equipped to know about these programs and to help either fund students or even just resource families with this option. So that's kind of a growing awareness in the DVR field. So we're excited about that. Wonderful. Okay,
Yeah,
well, you will go ahead.
Mhm. Please keep doing what you're doing, because I had no idea Ariel entering the transition program that college would even be an option for her anytime in her life.
Mhm.
And we have spent the past couple of years in great turmoil in our house because it was not a good fit for her, what I was presented. And so I'm extremely happy, and I think she's going to do well if I can get her in through the college programming. So I appreciate y'all
Good.
keeping up.
Oh, absolutely. Thanks for saying that, Tammy. Yeah, I think, those stories never end of like all these families that are finally taking a breath of fresh air, that there's something to challenge their students, that inclusion. I think the big thing is that it's inclusive, right? These are not programs that are secluded on college campuses, because what would that do? But they're included, and therefore we're just seeing so much confidence in these students and their future and the jobs that they're attaining and independent living, all those pieces. So I'm so glad that you and Ariel are able to pursue that, no matter what the timeline looks like. That's encouraging. Wonderful. Alrighty. Well, I will send you, as I mentioned, I'll send you all these slides tomorrow. You'll see that I even had more slides that I thought I was going to go to because I misread my time frame, but that's okay. Just more research or resources for you guys to look through. Feel free to reach out directly to us as you have questions, and just so grateful for your time and that you're willing to learn and pass this information along. So thank you so much.
Whenever you stop the recording, can I make a couple of points?
Absolutely. Let me get to it right now.